And in many ways, again, I kind of see it as being kind of a better version of what he kind of had in Arizona, yet with more resources available to him than he would have had that he had in Arizona, and and potentially what he had in Vancouver as well.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna be a big thing. And I think it's interesting because with him that you're taking this, it's this rebuilding team that's taking the expectation is to take that next step. And and when you bring in a coach like that, you're not expecting to rebuild for much longer. It's similar, interestingly, with the Quenville hire, which I think is another interesting one. Obviously, there's obviously there's more stuff outside of hockey talk about. We're not going to dive too much into that, it's partially because we're not qualified to, or at least I'm not. I don't know about, maybe you are, but I'm certainly not. So I'm not going to
I'm
dive
a
into
writer.
it as
I'll leave it at that.
into it as much. The big thing is with Quenville is you hire him. He's won 3 cups. He's a winner. He's won where he's gone, and the conversation was he was building Florida into the team that was going to be this dynasty, which they are now. And with
Yeah.
more, although whether he was there or not to credit it, and when you bring him in, the expectation is he's going to add enough wins to get them into the playoffs and into the contention conversation when a team that is the young players are hitting their stride. And we mentioned with Gulleton earlier that he hasn't been an NHL coach in a while. Quenville, he last coached in 2021. It's
Hmm.
2025. It's 4 years later.
Yeah.
Are we overconfident? That's my question really with him, is because obviously we know about his past success. Are we overconfident with Quenville, who's been out of the league for a while, who is an older coach and hasn't won a cup in a while?
No, I mean it's certainly the end of the Blackhawks. Certainly the era with the his heyday of success with the Blackhawks. Uh, One thing I look at with him though is that he does bring with him, multiple organizational experience. Starting with St. Louis, continuing with Colorado, having the ultimate success with the Blackhawks. And I do have to go back to Florida again. They were a team that they were seven when he resigned. They were 7-0 to start the season when he resigned. That I distinctly remember. So it's not that long ago in this circumstance. I don't think you quite you lose your touch as a coach in 3 to 4 years in this case. And I've no doubt that there were things that he had to do to obviously to get himself back to the point of where he is now, coaching them. It's a different thing. I'm curious to see, what happens. Certainly, the situation with Mason McTavish is still kind of hovering out there for that team. How he kind of handles a player like that to start with, because he's the kind of guy that if the guy's not on board, he's gonna want to. He's not here. I'm not going to be worrying about him. So but there's a lot. If you're him, I could see for him for Quenville, he looks at that Anaheim team and says they're being built. They're being built big and relatively strong, and with a good defense and a good young goaltender in Dostal. Um, he has enough. I think he has enough cachet with me. In his, from that it wasn't that long ago to me. 4 years is not quite as massive a gap to necessarily lose anything on your fastball. And I would say expectations have to be adjusted, his own expectations, at least knowing, okay, I'm trying to push this team forward. But like we always say, year one is always the year that you're trying to install the standard, the culture, everything you always talk about in your first year as a coach, the kind of the way we're going to do things here. So I
It,
think we have to keep that in mind in year one before everybody's sort of like, oh, they're not doing well. So Quenville has lost, has lost his fastball, so to speak.
it is interesting with Quenville because I wonder with the Ducks, it's Pat Verbeek's on the hot seat. You make this
Yeah.
hire, you have to get into the playoffs. And if they don't, even if Quenville's making those right steps, do you think that it's possible they get into this cycle again where a new GM comes in and whether they like Quenville or not, they want to bring in their guy, they want to make that hire. I think you could say the same thing honestly with Marco Sturm as well, but that's like they're in a different spot. But do you feel that that could happen with Quenville, or is that not an issue?
I feel if Quenville has if there's good signs, even if they're not, even if Verbeek is let go, if they look like they're still making some level of, if they're making some kind of a progress, if they see growth with those players, I wouldn't be too surprised in this case if Quenville ends up kind of calling the shots on whoever the next general manager is going to be. That's the way I look at it. There is that it might be someone who had worked with during his time in Chicago that who they bring in as the new general manager, and it's someone that he's going to be able to work. He'll be able to work with in terms of building whatever that vision that he has for this team will be.
It might be that he's hired and the ownership really wanted to bring him in more than Verbeek as well. Maybe
Yeah,
consider
and that's what I'm
with
saying. He has. I almost feel like he and Verbeek aren't necessarily tied at the hip. I feel like they've hired Quenville. They've signed on for what he does. There'd have to be a substantial, gulf between him and the younger players for him to be out in this circumstance, for him to leave.
yeah. I mean that's the big thing with him. If yeah, if you lose the locker room slash like maybe they don't buy in right away. I mean with Quenville, the line everyone knows that players love him. Players play up to him, so you
Yeah.
shouldn't see that issue. And but otherwise, yeah, that it really has to go south for him.
Hmm.
The last name is really the biggest name of them all, which I think it is because Mike Sullivan, you saw the success he had in Pittsburgh. And as soon as he was fired in Pittsburgh, you knew he was getting hired by someone. You knew it was going to be the highest bidder, and you were thinking it's going to be the Rangers, and it was. And the question really is, can I think the Rangers are in a unique spot. So are they going to succeed with Sullivan as their? Is Sullivan being put in a spot to succeed, or is it like again the long game? He'll be better off, and he'll have him playing better.
You think they're probably hoping for both in this circumstance. You want to have immediate. The big thing concern I have with the Rangers is, and he had enviable center depth when he during the time that he was head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, they were one of the standards of the league. They don't quite have that in New York. So, do I think that the New York starts to try think about that? I mean, you're going to put Zibanejad. Is it center? Is it wing? To me, Zibanejad feels more like a wing than a center. Just from his, you're asking him to sort of take on certain defensive responsibilities that may or may not be the work with his game. So it wouldn't surprise me even in the first year if there's a little bit of a sidestep for the Rangers as they kind of figure things out with how Sullivan wants to play. And I think it's a solid staff. You have Quinn back, which is that part to me was just fascinating seeing, David Quinn back in New York as an assistant coach after being their head coach during their transitional period. So I find Sullivan to me was always again, and the minute he was out in Pittsburgh, New York to me was immediately the name that came in. What was interesting to me was we had this conversation in the press box during the season was things were not going well at Pittsburgh. There was always the talk that Torts at the end of the year would maybe finish up, move upstairs in the organization, maybe as an assistant, because he always wanted to sort of do the assistant GM thing, and that because of the relationship between Torts and Sullivan, who know each other, that Sullivan might consider going to the Flyers. But I also countered that with everybody with saying, I think Sullivan's going to be very cognizant of the fact that he's not going to jump from the Pittsburgh Penguins to their cross-state rivals in the first year that he's available. The Penguins and the Rangers don't quite have the same vitriol with one another that say the Penguins and the Flyers have with one another.
Yeah, it still does feel like a rivalry, just not as much. And yeah, it does it is interesting with Sullivan. Yeah, whether he could have gone there, maybe would he want to play under Tortorella? I don't know, but Sullivan is also one of those people that does want more control. And it's I guess the same question is, does he kind of have that Quenville thing where if Drury's on the hot seat, does he have that Quenville, I don't know, cachet or that cred
Drury,
where
but,
he could
but Drury's got a
stay? I
multi.
mean, he's
But
going to be there for the
gotta
long
remember,
term.
Drury's just got a multi-year extension. So in many ways, I
Yeah,
think the two of them are. I know you could fire a guy on a multi-year extension. I think it would be pretty dumb for the Rangers to do that. And again, it was a very bumpy season last year for Chris Drury as a general manager. Make no mistake about it.
it,
What he may have, I'm curious to see what he's learned from that because again, he's a relatively young general manager. and maybe reconsidering how he did things in this circumstance. And it might be a case here where Sullivan, because he's known to be a coach that always, like much like with Taka in this case, because again, Taka coached under Sullivan, they have a good reputation for being able to get star players to buy into what they do. And I think that is something that I think will potentially go a long way in New York to kind of right the ship, because as much as I enjoy Peter Laviolette as a head coach, if you want to talk about a guy if we're going to talk about a guy whose message gets lost within the second, third year, I always talk about the Lavi bump,
Yeah,
and then afterwards things, and we used to talk before that about
teams
the
always implode.
Elandino bump.
Yeah,
Year
it's
one's
the same
great, and then
story.
everything falls apart after that.
Laviolette, it's his team's always imploded, and it's interesting because that you talk about Laviolette, Drury's not had a good run as a GM. Where we talk about the coaching hires, they've had their short shelf life, and really you look at the run, like yeah, they've made it to the Eastern Conference Finals twice.
Mhm.
But yeah, you have those bumps in between, those bad seasons in between, and you look at the roster now, and the farm system's not great. You don't have a lot of depth, and the defense is really questionable. And you look at the roster as a whole, and Sullivan's not put in a great position. But maybe that's a bonus of bringing Sullivan in, is that he does have more say over personnel decisions. That he's going to be part of free agency decisions, part of the going to have more of a say there, which is going to, I think, help them out, especially if they are going
And
to
the
compete.
dynamic of a young general manager, a relatively young general manager in Drury, and a veteran coach who's seen it all in Sullivan, who's been through. I think in many ways it'll help Drury in some ways as a general manager, because again, the coach kind of with Sullivan, he's going to look at, he's going to say, okay, what players that are out there that are going to help me, and then Drury's job is going to be to facilitate bringing in the players that will help them become a success. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what a general manager's job is, to basically go out and shop for the groceries that are on the grocery list that the coach gives you.
But yeah, there's a little bit of that. It's also a little bit of, I mean, you got to make the right hires. You got to have the right
Yes.
staff in place. So
Absolutely right.
it's funny, like that. What I've learned covering the NHL, being a GM, is more than just fantasy hockey or fantasy sports where you're drafting and bring players and making trades. It's a lot more complex to that. Let's wrap up. I actually throw this. I throw a curveball at you or whatever you want to call it, but just kind of throw this at you to wrap up, which is of the eight coaches, which one, if you were to bet on one to win the Jack Adams, and we've seen rookie head coaches, first of all, get into the conversation, and second, win the award. I actually have the odds in front of me, so I could rattle off the
Yeah.
favorite, by the way, on I just checked this on Vegas Insiders. Joel Quenneville is actually the favorite of all coaches. Whether that means something or not, Sheldon Keefe was the favorite entering last season for the Devils. So you get the theme where a new coach comes in. You could paint the story in your head where one of these coaches comes in, brings a team to the playoffs or contention. Quenneville's the favorite at plus 700. Sullivan among new coaches is second with plus 1,600, which uh, those odds, and then bunch of them are in the 2,000 range. You have Lane Lambert, Dan Muse at the 4,000, 5,000 plus 4,000 plus 5,000, but the rest are in that 2,000 range.
Yeah.
I'll rattle them off if you pick one. But of that group, that the eight new coaches, if you had to bet on one, which we're not doing that right now, obviously, or maybe at all.
Mhm.
But which one would you bet on?
It's tough not to bet with Quenville, because again, you see the sort of the underlying combination of roster build and coach, and the coach, the way the coach likes to run, how he likes his team structured. It's tough not to think about him. Sullivan again. I feel like he needs a bit more center depth for him to kind of really. That being said, there's talent there in New York. I mean, there's definitely the only thing that might hamstring their ability to go deep. There's questions, I think, with their blue line beyond Fox, Gavrikov, and some of the, and because we get to the anywhere past like sort of the fourth defenseman on that team, it starts to get a little hairy. Carson Soucy is who he is. I'm not a big fan. Nothing against him personally. It's just, it's like watching a battleship, trying to maneuver up the ice. It's a bit tough to watch. And Vakanainen is, he's okay. I'm Borgen. I kind of like Borgen, but I'm not in love with Borgen. But I would also say, amongst other things, the I just see it in this case where I think Quenville's probably the most likely. Lambert, there's some underlying, and I do wonder if he has any level, if he somehow sneaks that team into the playoffs, Lambert. I think it will be a guy who I think in this circumstance would be a fascinating possible dark horse in this case because there's some underlying stuff in Seattle.
It's
Taco really kind of clicked going there. Does he find his, can he stay at that? Can he continue this season at that point? It's something I'm going to be fascinated with.
it's so funny you mentioned Lambert because he's this. I have the same thing where if you're painting a story, if you're drawing
Mhm.
if you're painting a narrative, basically drawing up a narrative for the season, Lambert has a good case. All it really takes for him, and he's got plus 5,000 odds, which are great odds. If you're painting a picture or trying to see how this season plays out, it's the Kraken are great. They make the playoffs in a weaker Pacific, maybe, which I mean, the Pacific is not as weak as actually many people think it is. But anyway, he makes the playoffs and
It's not
he
like the
looks,
Metro's doing great. I can tell you that.
yeah, I mean, but even so, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of teams that are up in the air there, and he looks great. And all of a sudden, yeah, you can draw that case up for him. And I think I put Adam Foote in the same category, Pacific Division, where
Yeah, we really
they
didn't talk much about
overachieve.
Foot. Foot's in an interesting spot there in Vancouver.
Yeah,
We didn't really get into Foot. Kind of, that I don't know kind of yet what to make of him. I mean, you always think of his days, obviously. I mean, they're going to be a defense. There's going to be defense that's involved, but he's got a tall order in terms of getting Elias Pettersson really back on. If he can get Pettersson back to what Pettersson was, a couple seasons ago, then that goes a long way for Vancouver. Still having Besser back in this case. If he can get those guys to kind of buy in on that, then Foot, I have to kind of keep him in the back of my head as well.
yeah. I mean, for them, it's a bounce back season, which maybe that's not enough for them, but you
Well,
could say
If
last
Demko can
season
stay healthy, I mean, that's
everything.
the thing. They've invested so much money now in the goaltending situation there between Demko and Lankinen in this case. That's a lot of money that they've sunk. If he can stay healthy, Demko, and they can balance it between him and Lankinen, and they get decent
Maybe.
goals, that's like the old strike. I say the same thing with the Flyers right now. We didn't even say that. Like, whatever it is that Rick Tocchet does, the blue line, we'll see. I feel a little better about the forwards than I do about the defense. The goaltending's still a big old question mark. The Flyers have, arguably one of the worst goaltending in the National
Yeah.
Hockey League, and they're still having an open audition for all intents and purposes for who might be the goaltender there, who will be the starting goalie here. So we'll see.
Yeah. I would put that Tockett's the last. I don't like it as much, except for I
They're a
would
playoff
put
team,
a
and they might
I would
be.
I would put a little bit of juice on Tocchet there. Actually, Tockett's the name that I keep going back to because Quenneville's become this favorite now, or everyone kind of expects it to the point where you're thinking maybe it doesn't happen, maybe they're a year away still. Tocchet has a lot of those pieces. We talked about the Pacific Division being up for grabs. Yeah, the Metro Division, if they can get that third spot, there's going to be a great case for him. And I think it's one of those. As much as there's the question marks, is that the Flyers are set up to potentially sneak up on teams. Will they or not? In the Metropolitan Division, they could, but if they do, then that's the name that's the one of the new coaches. I would say that's the one I'd keep in mind. Just in terms of narrative, this award is generally a narrative based award, I would put him up for that. Um, all right. That's all we got. Anthony, thank you for joining.
Mike, it was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on the show. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
it
it.
was a pleasure. Hope it turned out well. It was great catching up on the coaches and great catching up as always. Anthony hosts the Off the Post radio, Off the Post podcast or radio. I
All
forget.
Post Radio,
Off the Post radio.
which is the main flagship podcast for Hockey Hot Stove. We do it twice a week. Wednesdays usually at 4:30, and Sundays, we weekend one, but usually Sundays at about 9:30. Which obviously you were a guest with us recently for your rebuild rankings, which made for a great conversation and a great podcast.
Yeah, it was fun hopping on then. And check it out, and check out all the great work that Anthony puts up at Hockey Hot Stove and also general Philly stuff. Check out all the stuff there. And check out all my work at Hockey Writers or Hockey Hot Stove and a few and uh, yeah, the season's around the corner. It's exciting. We're almost there. So we hope you enjoyed. Check out all the great content both of us are putting out, and Make sure to tune in next time for another great episode. Thank you.